In Rise of Kingdoms, Aethelflaed is one of the most popular early game commanders because she is a legendary commander that players get for free. So today I'm going to be updating you guys on my thoughts and opinions on Aethelflaed in 2025. But first, what's going on, guys? Cheers. Now, as you guys know, I am a partnered creator with Rise of Kingdoms, so if you guys want more Rise of Kingdoms guides, make sure you subscribe down below and click that bell. Drop a thumbs up while you're down there. The power is in the hands of you guys. Okay, so the first thing we have to go over here is how do you get your hands on Aethelflaed? Now obviously this video is for new players. I don't want to hear it in the comments section below. You've been playing 2+ years. This video is not for you, okay? Or maybe it is if you've just been progressing really slow. But Aethelflaed can be obtained in one single place, and that is in the expedition. That is one of the campaigns down here. You click expedition and you will find that Aethelflaed is a reward for progressing through the expedition, and in particular you're going to see these side missions, the level 30-1 30-2. These are going to grant you what is called Treasure of the Warrior Queen. Now you're also going to get these, I think, the first time that you actually complete this. There's a first time completion reward, and every single day when you log into Rise of Kingdoms you're going to be getting the Treasure of the Warrior Queen, and if you go all the way through 70-2 you're going to get, I think, 12 of these chests every single day, and they have a chance of containing between 1 and 5 Aethelflaed sculptures, a couple of other goodies as well, but really you're mainly going to get some keys and Aethelflaed from here. Additionally, if you come into the metal store, you're going to see that Aethelflaed's sculptures are available for purchase for 1,500 metal coins, and these are obtained just by beating these levels, and then you accumulate them every single day by coming back and logging in, and you can buy up to 3 of these sculptures per day. So 10 sculptures, you're going to be able to summon Aethelflaed for free, and that is literally the only way to get her. You can't convert universal sculptures into her, you can't buy her from a bundle, you can't, there's no other way to get her. That is it. Okay, so even as a whale player you can't really speed up your expertise of Aethelflaed, but the good news is that no matter what, as long as you are logging in and coming back every single day, you are going to expertise this legendary commander 100% free to play. And then once you've expertised your Aethelflaed, you can actually continue to obtain those sculptures in the expedition metal store and from those chests. And if you come into your alliance shop, you can come over here to the alliance recycle tab. It's the third tab. There's 1, 2, and the third is behind my head here, and you can come all the way down to the bottom and you can recycle these Aethelflaed sculptures and you can get some number of credits for it. So that's going to be the easiest way to purchase passport pages here. So there's always going to be a use for your Aethelflaed sculptures even after she's expertised. Now that you know how to get Aethelflaed, let's go over her role here in Rise of Kingdoms, and you can see that her talent trees are leadership, peacekeeping, and support, and we're going to go over some of the best talent builds in just a moment. But let's also, while we're here, go over her skills so that way you know exactly what Aethelflaed is doing and what she's good at. The active skill, Arrow of Iron, it is a 1000 rage requirement AoE, that is area of effect, deals direct damage to up to 5 enemy troops in a fan shape with a damage factor of 800, and reduces their attack, defense, and health by 30% for 2 seconds. So there's 2 components here. First of all, there's an AoE, very powerful in the early game. Secondly, that is not a fan shape. It says fan shape, but in fact it is a half circle shape AoE. And third of all, there's a really powerful debuff here. It is a 90% stat reduction. It's only for 2 seconds, unfortunately, but still that's a lot of stats to just instantly be removing from your enemy. And this is especially powerful in the early game because lots of new players have a limited number of stats available anyway, because they don't have the latest greatest commanders, and they also might not have great equipment on their commanders as well. I mean, at the start of the game you don't even get equipment, right? So in the early game, players are running around with less stats to begin with, and removing 90% of them right away is kind of crazy. One other quick thing I want to mention here, if your Aethelflaed looks different from mine, it's because they've actually updated the graphics here for Aethelflaed. This is the newer graphics and this is the older graphics, and I prefer how the older Aethelflaed looks, which is why that's how she looks in game for me. But at the top of the screen here, if you click this little heart, you can change the appearance by clicking on this button right here. So if you guys prefer the new or the old, you can flip back and forth. It's up to you. I'll leave the new graphics for the rest of the video. You guys can tell me which one you prefer in the comments section below. But let's move on to the second skill, Thunderous Force. It says this commander's troop takes 20% less counter attack damage. Whenever this troop launches a basic attack, it has a 10% chance to reduce the march speed of the target's cavalry units by 50% for 3 seconds, or reduce the march speed of the target's other units by 30% for 3 seconds. So I guess they thought that 50% for all troop types was too powerful in the early game. I have no idea, but basically this stat is a small amount of tankiness and really nice instant proc slowdowns. The slowdowns here do have synergy on her kit. We'll talk about that in a second, but just so you guys know, less counterattack damage. The counterattack damage is the damage that you're dealing back to players that are hitting you. So even if you're not targeting them, if they're hitting you, you're always going to be dealing counterattack damage back. And likewise, if your Aethelflaed is hitting something, they're going to be dealing counterattack damage back to you. A lot of your damage that you take in the open field is not really counterattack damage. It is in the early game, there's more of it, or at least I should say it's a higher ratio of the damage that you take, but all in all, this is only a small amount of tankiness and a march speed reduction. It's also worth noting here that the march speed reduction doesn't look like it has a cooldown, so keep that in mind as well. The third skill says that this commander's troop deals 35% more damage to barbarians. Both the primary and secondary commander of this commander's troop gain 35% more experience from defeating barbarians. So as you guys know, barbarians are out in the world here. These you can deal more damage to, and you'll get more experience from them if you kill them with Aethelflaed. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but this applies to everything that has the barbarian tag at the top here. Okay, so if I click here, this is a player city. If I click here, this is called a stronghold. If I click here, this is called a resource point. This would be just on the map. So any barbarians are going to take more damage here. The fourth skill says if you're leading a rally, you gain 10% unit capacity, which just means your rallied army is 10% bigger. And if this commander's troop contains at least 3 different unit types, you gain 20% attack. Now, unfortunately for Aethelflaed, and we'll talk about the best commander pairs later, but a lot of these commander pairs do actually use just a single troop type because the benefits outweigh the extra attack that you get here from differentiating and having multiple troop types. But it's worth noting that if in the early game you're running an army that you just want to kind of slap everything together all in one, at least you get a bonus there, but I don't recommend it. And finally, warrior queen is the expertise. So you get this skill when you've completely maxed out all the other skills. Warrior queen says this commander's troop deals 20% more damage to enemy troops that have been slowed. So as you can see here, there is the synergy with the thunderous force. As you're slowing down the targets, when you do so, you're going to be dealing 20% more damage to them, which is very nice. Okay, now let's go over some of the best talent builds for Aethelflaed. And as you'll see later in the video, most of Aethelflaed's commander pairings involve Aethelflaed being the secondary commander. Okay, and as you guys know, the secondary commander's talents don't do anything, so keep that in mind. However, if you're going to be using Aethelflaed to kill barbarians out in the world, I would recommend a talent build something like this. Now, this talent build assumes that if you're going to rally barb forts with Aethelflaed, that she would be the primary commander. That's why we grab Mighty Force over here, but you can also use this talent build just for killing barbs out in the world. I really like Curing Chant because this gives you some sustain in the field. It just restores your troops, and so you can keep killing more and more barbarians. I also really like Trophy Hunter. You're going to get just a bunch of extra resources here for free, which is really nice. And Insight lets you use less action points to kill barbarians, which is why you want to use her as the primary with the peacekeeping tree. You also put 2 points into Rejuvenate, which gives you 100 rage when you use an active skill. This is for your primary or your secondary, so that's really good. The reason you don't put 3 here is because you do have a cap with the amount of rage you can gain per turn, and typically if you put 3 points here, that last extra 50 that you're getting here is typically just wasted, so you don't really need a 3rd point here. You could put that extra point somewhere else. I've chosen to go with 3 points in Fresh Recruits. This is great for killing barbs because you just have a bigger army, and you also can get 3 points into Hidden Wrath, which gives you extra rage as well. If you don't like Hidden Wrath, you can also grab something like this, where you would remove this point here. This was a mistake, and you put 2 points into Loose Formation here, so you take less skill damage. Everything else is identical on the trees. If for whatever reason you did want to use Aethelflaed as a primary commander for PvP, which I would not recommend, and we'll talk about, you know, her best pairs later, but if you did for whatever reason want to use her as primary, this is what I would be doing here. I would put 1 point into Cage of Thorns, I would put 4 points into Strategic Prowess, and then I would put 3 points into Armed to the Teeth and Armored to the Teeth, and our last 3 points would go into Steely Soul, with 1 point into the Peacekeeping Tree. Now the reason for this is because Armed to the Teeth and Armored to the Teeth give you a bunch of all damage dealt and all damage taken reduction if you have mixed troops, which is nice, and Strategic Prowess gives you extra defense defense for 2 seconds whenever you use an active skill, so that's a little bit of tankiness there as well. You get more normal damage here, and then of course you grab emergency protection to reduce the amount of skill damage you take, and the 1 point in Cage of Thorns is just to AoE slow down the enemies. That way you're dealing the 20% more extra damage with the expertise, right? So that's really nice. Now in just a minute we're going to talk about some of the best commander pairs, and a little bit of a spoiler alert, Sun Tzu is one of the best commander pairs for Aethelflaed, but I wanted to show you guys the talent build that I would use for Aethelflaed in the open field. It would be something like this, where you grab 5 points into Feral Nature, which gets you everything here in the main part of the skill tree, avoiding the offshoots on the sides, and then we put 1 point into Snare of Thorns, you put 3 points into Fleet of Foot, you grab 3 points in Strong of Body, and 3 points into Double-Headed Axe. Again, the reason that we grab Snare of Thorns here is because first of all, you're already going to be grabbing all this march speed over here, so you might as well come all the way up, get the stats here while you're there. And also again, Snare of Thorns will cause you to deal more damage with your army because of Aethelflaed's expertise, which is very nice. Again, the other reason that I put 3 points into march speed is because if you look at Aethelflaed's skills, she has no march speed at all, and the same thing is true for Sun Tzu. So you really want to get as much march speed as you can from the talents, and I think that it's just going to be a better use of your talents than grabbing something like Hold the Line, especially in the early game. Okay, so let's quickly go over the pros and cons of Aethelflaed, and we'll start here with the pros, and I'm going to be looking at my list here. First of all, and this goes without saying, she's free to play, right? You get her as a free legendary just by logging in. It's hard to beat that. You can't say that she's not worth it because she costs you nothing. You just get her by logging in. That's amazing. The second thing is that in the early game, her active skill is actually very good, and I know that as older players, right, myself included, it's kind of funny to think about Aethelflaed's AoE as strong, right? Strong, but there is one thing that is very important about Aethelflaed's AoE. First of all, as I said before, her active skill is actually a half circle. You'll see the shape here in just a second, and one of the cool things about that half circle is that you can actually chain barbarians, right? And so as you can see here, I just got this level 40 barbarian to attack me for free. I didn't have to do anything special. I didn't have to spend any action points. He's just attacking me now because I was able to poke him with my half circle AoE. And so first of all, that's amazing for getting good value out of your action points, right? This is a very limited resource, and when you kill these barbarians, especially with Aethelflaed primary, remember we have Trophy Hunter as the talent, I'm gonna get some free stuff, right? I'm gonna get some resources, some experience, and things like that, and now I'm gonna get twice as much of those goodies. I mean, you could just see what's listed right here. I'm gonna get twice as much now because Aethelflaed basically grabbed this second barbarian for free, right? So now that I killed the first one, I can keep killing the second one. The other thing about this half circle is that in a PvP scenario, you're going to be more likely to hit the enemy targets, right? I mean, it's just it makes sense. There's just a bigger area on the battlefield that you're hitting, and as you can see, there's the half circle from Aethelflaed, and my secondary is actually Richard the First, and Richard has an AoE debuff, but his shape, that debuff shape, is pretty similar to how most AoE is in the game, right? And so you can see immediately kind of the benefit of the half circle is just how much bigger it is, which increases the probability that you actually deal damage and hit all 5 targets. So that's the first benefit of the AoE from Aethelflaed. The second benefit of the AoE on Aethelflaed is in the wording. She deals 800 damage factor to 5 targets, and one of the things that's missing here is something that you'll notice in Yi Seong-Gye's active skill. It says every additional target reduces the damage to each target by 15%. So as you're hitting more targets with Yi Seong-Gye, then the damage dealt to each individual target is a little bit lower, right? And this is kind of a way to stop AoE from scaling way too strong, because it would just break the game. It's already super strong at 1700, right? And that's kind of the case for most AoE commanders in the entire game. Even Bai Chi, who is the newest AoE commander in the game at the time of recording this video, it's 2400. Every additional target reduces the damage to each target by 15%. So with that statement missing on Aethelflaed's active skill, her 800 damage factor is actually much better than it looks on paper. In fact, if we compare her active skill damage factor to other commanders in the early game, you'll find that she's actually in 4th place. Now, it's kind of funny that there are 2 epic commanders ahead of her, but first of all, that just goes to show how incredible Sun Tzu is, but also she has a really strong strong debuff, whereas Baibars technically has a debuff, but it's march speed, so it's like it's nothing crazy, right? The debuff on Aethelflaed is much more powerful. The buff on Sun Tzu is also really good. It gives you extra rage, so you know, Sun Tzu just is the goat in the early game. But YSG coming in first place strictly because of his 50% bonus to skill damage on the fourth skill, right? We also have the 20% bonus to Sun Tzu. So if you're comparing her to Kusunoki, Minamoto, Pyrrhus, Cao Cao, El Cid, Bjorn, it's just no comparison. She is outputting way more skill damage than most other commanders in the early game. So as a free to play commander, really nice. And again, also this is thanks to the fact that she deals 800 damage factor and it's not reduced per target. Another pro that is worth mentioning for Aethelflaed is that in the early game she's actually quite good in Sunset Canyon. Sunset Canyon is, as you guys know, a game mode where you put 5 of your armies against 5 other armies. Aethelflaed being a universal secondary commander and having a really wide AoE fan shape with debuffs, you really can make good use out of Aethelflaed here, and she could be used really in the front row or the back row. I wouldn't really put her in your off lane over here. I mean, maybe people do that, but usually that's not where you would want all your debuffs. You want them to be in the center of the fight. Again, I just wanted to point out that in the early game when you don't have that many other options, Aethelflaed is pretty good. And the final sort of pro that I want to give Aethelflaed is that she is really great as a universal secondary commander in the early game, and we'll talk about that when we talk about the best pairs. You could jump to that if you want to use the timestamps. But being a leadership commander, there's nothing on her kit that restricts her to a specific troop type. So if we take a look at a commander such as Minamoto, his second skill says that he gains march speed and attack for cavalry units, and so really this skill does absolutely nothing unless he's paired with cavalry, and so you have to pair him with other cavalry commanders and use cavalry units. But for Aethelflaed, she has the benefit of just her skills work with any troop type, same with her talents. But then we have to talk about the cons for Aethelflaed, and these are pretty apparent. First of all, she has no stats on her kit whatsoever. There is no attack, there is no defense, there is no health. This is very dangerous for Aethelflaed because she is very squishy. The other thing is that she has no march speed, so she can't really take any hits, and she can't run away from unfavorable matchups in the open field, and so she is the definition of a slow glass cannon, right? That is unfortunate for Aethelflaed 100%, and that is absolutely her biggest flaw. There is a way to sort of compensate for that march speed, and we will talk about that in just a moment. But the other thing that is a huge con for Aethelflaed is that it's kind of funny, it's counterintuitive to what we just said. Her active skill is actually really weak for the mid to late game, right? So where this shines in the early game, it actually falls off a cliff in usability in the mid to late game, because as I showed you before, commanders such as Bai Chi are 2400 to 5 targets. Like, it's actually insane how much damage you can output with some of these newer commanders in the game, right? You know, King Arthur is 3 targets 2800. It's absolutely insane. So Aethelflaed's active skill is good in the early game, but actually pretty bad in the late game. Now, the way that you can compensate for the march speed on Aethelflaed is actually in the museum. Now, this is a building that you unlock later in your Rise of Kingdoms journey, but as you can see right off to the left here, Aethelflaed is actually a museum relic that you get for free, or at least I should say it's very cheap for that first unlock through the tutorial. And you can see that if you upgrade it to the second tier, she gains 25% attack and 15% march speed. So this is incredibly good for Aethelflaed as a commander. However, again, you don't get this in the early game, which is when she is most used. So it's kind of a way to help her out in the mid to late game, but unfortunately it's just not really enough, right? The march speed is nice. Again, this is generic stats, so you can put her with anybody and they will gain the benefit, whether it's calves, infantry, archers, whatever. And 15% march speed is actually pretty good, right? This is more march speed than we see on other commanders such as Zhuge Liang, right, which is a late game really powerful archer commander. So it's nice, but it's a little bit comes around a little bit too late to be useful. But I will also say that Aethelflaed is definitely due for her third tier upgrade here in the museum. As you can see, commanders like Yi Seong-Ye, the archers, and Charles Martel, the infantry commanders in the early game, they already have their tier 3 upgrades. We don't see the tier 3 upgrades for the cavalry commanders nor the leadership commanders, right? And so it's only a matter of time. I suspect that they will get their tier 3 upgrades by the end of 2025, but that's just a speculation. I literally have no idea what the timeline is. I have no insider knowledge, but keep your eyes peeled for the next upgrade for Aethelflaed, because if it gives her like 40% attack and 20% march speed, that could actually be like a really solid secondary commander for some late game commanders. And if that's the case, we'll talk about it in another video. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe down below. All in all though, I would say the second tier upgrade is not really worth it at the time of recording this video, so I wouldn't recommend doing it. Now, just like how the museum and relic system comes around later in the game, another feature that comes around later in the game is known as formations, right? And let's quickly go over what some of the best formations are for Aethelflaed. Now, first of all, the formation only matters for your primary commander, and as you'll see in just a moment, Aethelflaed is often the secondary, so this is going to apply for your entire army. But as you know, Aethelflaed deals skill damage, and so the wedge formation, if you're doing PvP and even in PvE scenarios, the wedge formation is hands down going to be the most powerful to pushing out the most amount of damage for Aethelflaed. However, as you guys know, in the mid to late game, you're not going to be using her for much of PvP, right? Like there's going to be, we'll talk about it a little bit, but it's really not a big thing. And so if you're going to be using her for PvE content, that is player versus environment, that is killing barbarians or killing barbarian forts, then I would recommend the triple line formation. This is what I use. This gives you 5% march speed. It's just generic. As you guys know, Aethelflaed has no march speed, and so you combine this with the museum relic that I have, and she has a total of 20% march speed. That's kind of in line with all the other commanders in the late game, so that's actually kind of nice, and it is universal. As you can see here, we have a bunch of just bonus damage to barbarians, and also that's what I have here on the inscriptions. So damage taken reduction is also 11.2%. So that's what I would use for if you're going to do barbarian fort rallies as well. Another thing that I see a lot, and this is just a quick little tip, so if you guys made it this far into the video, you're going to get a quick little tip here. Okay, a lot of times what I see players do is they rally barb forts with Cao Cao, which is actually insane. That is a horrible idea. Do not do that. Why should you not do that? Because he has the mobility tree. The mobility tree gives you absolutely no benefit when you're rallying a fort, right? It's just, sure, you can walk to the fort a little bit faster, but the rest of his talents are not very good for rallying barb forts, right? Like you could put your points in here, and maybe, you know, you might have this if you're just going to use him as just a generic peacekeeper. Why is it not working? But like, what are you going to do? You can't put anything in the mobility tree. That's ridiculous. So I mean, like maybe you grab saving cross, right? And then this, you don't need that for barb forts. This, you don't need that for barb forts. This is like, okay, you'll get 3% health. You have 7 points left over. Like maybe there's a way that you could do this to optimize and maybe grab emblazoned shield. But like at the end of the day, I feel like you would just be better off with burning blood and rejuvenate, so that way you're casting more active skills. That's just my 2 cents. That's how I feel about that. If you're trying to decide, do you do Aethelflaed primary or Cao Cao primary, I would say go for Aethelflaed. And the final formation we're going to talk about here is actually the staggered formation. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice in the end game, like I said, is that she's pretty useless, right? Aethelflaed's pretty useless. However, with the generic march speed that she has on her museum relic, what you could do is combine that with Aethelflaed's staggered formation. And what this will let you do is if your allies are rallying barb forts, you can use Aethelflaed to really quickly march to that player city to reinforce or join that rally. Or if you are in KvK and you are trying to reinforce a flag and you are able to drop Aethelflaed in a city that is right next to that flag, then you can use the staggered formation to a little bit more quickly jump from that city to that flag, right? I know that it's only a small amount of distance to walk, but 15% extra march speed on top of the 15 she gets from her museum relic does make a small difference, especially when the enemy is rallying with something that has AoE. You don't want to get clapped by a huge enemy rally AoE as you're trying to reinforce that city. It's kind of crazy. So using the staggered formation just squeezes you in that flag just maybe 1 second faster, and that could be the difference between taking AoE and not, and that will save you a little bit of a hospital bill. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's talk about the best early game commanders for Aethelflaed, right? I told you that's where she shines, and a lot of you watching are new players, so let's go over that really quick. The single best pairing for Aethelflaed, and I've talked about this before, it is Sun Tzu. Okay, Sun Tzu as the primary commander, Aethelflaed as the secondary commander. Why is this? Of course, both of them deal AoE skill damage. Okay, you also gain extra rage every time you hit an enemy with the skill damage from Sun Tzu, which means you're going to cast your active skills even more frequently. His third skill gives you 10% health and 10% 30% damage taken reduction. This is the tankiness that Aethelflaed needs. It's not a lot, but it is nice for the early game. And finally, 20% more skill damage. This makes Aethelflaed's already strong active skill hit a little bit harder, which we really like. And as I showed earlier in the video, this is the talent build I would use because there is synergy with Snare of Thorns. This second epic commander I would consider would be something like Imhotep. Now this is your archer epic that you could pair with Aethelflaed. Imhotep is going to be the primary commander, so you can do full archers, and this is a full debuffing army. Now this is very unpopular to run full support armies, especially if you're a free-to-play player, because you want to prove to your kingdom that you can get kills, and this doesn't get you kills, it just enables everyone else to get kills. But the debuff on Imhotep is insane. This is also a pairing that you might consider using in your Sunset Canyon lineup in the early game because of how powerful its debuff is. But you also gain 30% archer stats and some skill damage taken reduction and a chance to reduce the attacker's skill damage dealt, which is kind of nice. All in all, this is a full support army. Two talent builds you can consider would be something like this or this one's going to deal a little bit more damage, the other one's going to be a little bit more tanky because of emergency protection. The next pair we're going to talk about is Baibars, again as the primary with Aethelflaed as the secondary. That's going to be because of the Cav tree, and this is just like with Sun Tzu, a pure AoE skill damage march, 5 targets, 1000 damage factor, and as you'll see, we have an AoE slowdown, which remember Aethelflaed deals bonus damage to slow down targets, and so this is a match made in heaven there. You also gain 20% cav attack, and the rest of the skills here aren't super good. The fact that you can leave combat here is nice, especially because Aethelflaed has no march speed, so that will help you a little bit, but all in all, this is pure raw damage. And this is the single best talent build for skill damage cavalry. You can ignore that this is Pelagius, I just don't have a max level Baibars. If you wanted to do a mixed army that is full AoE skill damage, then you would do Mehmed primary with Aethelflaed secondary. This commander pairing is very rare, almost nobody uses this because almost nobody has a Mehmed that is in usable condition in the early game. That would be 5511 or 5515, or better of course if you're a whale, but the synergy is there. It's because it's a double AoE pairing. You have extra skill damage and attack and more units. All in all, it makes sense. It's just not really something most people do. Again, I would do Mehmed primary, and I would do something like this. Just like with Mehmed, if you're a bit of a spender in the early game and you've been investing in Pyrrhus, then you could do a Pyrrhus primary with Aethelflaed secondary, and this is really just a strong infantry full legendary march. You have some march speed here, which is nice, a little bit of tankiness, single target skill damage, and the biggest downside of Pyrrhus is that he's missing AoE, right? And so Aethelflaed kind of gives him that, and it's sort of a nice little match made in heaven because she's pretty squishy. There's a little bit of tankiness with the Pyrrhus. With Pyrrhus as the primary, this is the talent build that I would use, and it's kind of not even close. You make sure you grab the march speed over here, and pretty much the rest of the infantry tree is filled in. Grab loose formation and no weakness as well. Ignore that this is Richard, they have the same talent tree. Speaking of Richard, however, you could also do a Richard primary with an Aethelflaed secondary, and the benefit of this commander pairing is similar to the Imhotep. This is a much more supportive march, and that's because you have a super powerful debuff on the active skill from Richard and Aethelflaed. For 2 seconds, 5 enemy troops deal 30% less damage and lose 15% march speed. So again, the synergy there with the slowdown for the expertise on Aethelflaed, and he also gives you the tankiness that you do not have on Aethelflaed as well. But most players are not going to be maxing out their Richard or even having him at 5511. Most players should not be using Richard in PvP. But again, if you wanted a maximum slowdown march, then this would be the way to go. If you just wanted to be annoying and just keep your enemies from running away, that would be a great strategy. And just like with Pyrrhus, this is the talent build I would use. If you wanted the maximum amount of AoE skill damage that you could do, you would do YSG primary with Aethelflaed secondary. This is the cream of the crop when it comes to slow glass cannons, so keep that in mind. But the 50% skill damage bonus here is going to make Aethelflaed's active skill hit as hard as it possibly can. You have a raged engine here and a really powerful circular AoE with YSG. This is my go-to talent build. Just like with Mehmed though, this pairing you don't see very much, I would say, and you would have to have already invested heavily in Yi Seong-Gye with no one else to pair him with. I think there's probably better pairings for Yi Seong-Gye, but I wanted to at least mention it here. In the same vein as that, Thutmose works with an Aethelflaed secondary, but if you have a max Thutmose, you probably have a max YSG and you're just going to pair those together. But again, I want to at least mention it here. If you have them, that's a pair you could do. This is probably the talent build I would go for max damage, but again, just like with Imhotep, you could do this for more tankiness. Okay, that's going to do it for all of the early game and sort of KVK 1 commander pairings. I went over all the most common ones and some of the less relevant ones that most players don't use but could use if you wanted to. The main one though, like just to be clear, is it's easily hands down Sun Tzu primary, Aethelflaed secondary. That is like the go-to in the early game. Maybe you might see people running like the Barbarians Aethelflaed as well, perhaps. Now just to be clear, I didn't talk about Minamoto. Technically you could do Minamoto primary with Aethelflaed secondary. The reason that I didn't talk about this is because if you have Minamoto, then you're definitely a spender, and I think it's probably better to just put Minamoto either with Cao Cao or with your Bybars, because Bybars is also a nice 5 target AoE, so you might as well do that and then put your Aethelflaed somewhere else, for example behind Sun Tzu, right? So technically again it's possible, but it just, if you're spending on Minamoto, you're not probably going to do that. But let's talk about KVK2, okay, because there are a couple of changes here. First of all, you get your hands on Saladin in KVK2 from the Wheel of Fortune. Saladin is definitely a commander you can pair with Aethelflaed behind him, and this commander pairing works because we have once again a march speed reduction for 5 seconds. That is the longest march speed reduction we've talked about in this entire video, which means 5 full seconds of 20% bonus damage from your Aethelflaed. Now you also have defense here, which is a little bit of tankiness, and you have 30% skill damage taken reduction and 20% more counterattack damage taken reduction. Remember, Aethelflaed already has 20% counterattack damage taken reduction on her second skill, right here. And so this is a pretty tanky way to run a cavalry march in KVK2. It's not super tanky, but it's more tanky than many other options. And also Saladin, just like with Pyrrhus for example, is missing AoE, and so Aethelflaed gives him that, which is really nice. Also because he's cavalry, he's kind of fast, Aethelflaed is kind of slow, so they kind of work out really nice together. This is the talent build I would use if I were going to go that route. Remember, only 2 points into rejuvenate here. But the other commander we have to talk about is Bertrand. Now here's the thing about Bertrand, right? He was just reworked for season 2, and his skills were changed a little bit, so that way he does have a combo damage AoE on the active skill with rage reduction. Now really there's not that much synergy on the surface, other than the fact that they're both AoE commanders. Bertrand's a little bit fast, so you know it kind of compensates for what Aethelflaed is missing, but there is a little bit of synergy that you may have not considered, and that is the fact that first of all he's a little bit tanky, which is kind of nice. She needs that for sure, but also combo attacks can trigger effects that are triggered by basic attacks, right? So if we go back and take a look at Aethelflaed's kit, remember she would be the secondary commander here in this lineup. Where is she? The second skill on Aethelflaed has a instant proc slowdown for 3 seconds, and there's no sort of cooldown listed here, right? So you can, in theory, you know, with combo attacks on Bertrand, you would be popping this slowdown a lot more often than you would with any other commander on the battlefield, and the more often you slow the target, the more often you're going to get the 20% bonus damage here. So I think there is a small amount of synergy here with Bertrand primary, Aethelflaed secondary. This is the talent build I would probably use for that. You get a bunch of stuff in the combo tree, and then you grab Emblazoned Shield, Undying Fury, and then you grab 1 point in the march speed over here because you only have 4 points left. If you wanted to, you could put 3 here instead, or you could grab Impenetrable if you want. So that's really the only 2 changes in KVK2. There's 2 new cab commanders, you could try them out, and there's loose synergy with Bertrand now that he has been reworked. And finally, when it comes to the end game, it comes to season 3, Season of Conquest. Which commanders could you pair Aethelflaed with? And the answer is none. There's really nobody that you can use to good effect here in the end game. There's no real good synergy. There's not enough to bring her up to meta or even meta adjacent. The only commanders that I would think, like maybe you could do a Huo primary with the Aethelflaed secondary, because he also has a march speed reduction, which gives you a little bit of synergy there, and also he has a lot of tanky stats with his defense here, so it kind of makes up for the fact that she has none. But all in all, there's just really not great synergy, right? If you wanted to do Ragnar for the tankiness, again, maybe he has nice skill damage, but he's just so slow, and she has 15% march speed, but like that's not as much as you would get from something else from somewhere else. So really I would just caution you and say, hey, don't even think about using Aethelflaed for PvP in the end game. Even if you could possibly squeeze out some random C tier pairing, it's just not worth the hospital bill, honestly. Anyway guys, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you'll consider dropping a thumbs up down below. It takes 1 second and it really pushes this video out into the algorithm. It really helps out the channel a ton. And while you're down there, consider subscribing to the channel down below, clicking the bell to be notified the next time I upload a Rise of Kingdoms video, and comment down below your thoughts on Aethelflaed. If you're a brand new player, if you have any other questions about Aethelflaed, let me know in the comments section below. And if there's any other commander pairings or uses for Aethelflaed that I forgot about, please let me know in the comment section below as well. And with that being said guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.